Yo guys, and welcome back to the channel. Hope you guys are doing fantastic as usual. And in this video we will continue working on our to-do application like usual. And in the last few episodes we implemented some amazing drag and drop functionality, but also some responsive drag and drop. So in the last episode we actually had a look at responsive modifiers with the help of Tailwind CSS, so that we can have a different layout depending on the viewport. So the size of the screen practically. So that we can have a different layout when we are on a mobile phone, because that's the most sensible thing to do. We don't want to have like 3 columns next to each other like this. We're kind of running out of space then. So if I now use responsive design mode, we can clearly see that this looks a lot better than what we previously had. And we also looked a bit at some text wrapping. So if you write a really long essay over here and save that, it won't actually affect that. We will wrap down to the next line, which is not the default behavior. So you kind of had to do some different things here in to-do item here, specifically flex, wrap, and break all over here to do that text wrapping. But so now that we got that covered, we can look a bit at some other issues that we had with our responsive design here. So for example, we had these modals here that don't look optimal. They actually look way better than I expected them to look, but you see, you could actually fill out the full width here. We are on a mobile phone. We have practically no width. You know, if I'm even in 550 and I don't think anyone has that thick of a phone. So something like Galaxy S20, you know, 360 pixels. You kind of want to use all that space, you know. You can kind of have like 5 pixels padding or something. But when it comes to the mobile screen, we definitely want to utilize the width as much as possible, since there is so little of it. But of course, the main idea is that you put things in a more of a vertical layout on the phone, since we have, you know, kind of infinite space, since we can scroll down and up on our phones. But I feel like we should actually just stretch this modal out a bit here if we are on a mobile phone. So let's have a look at that. So we have a modal here. We have this nice modal component, in fact, which is an util actually. And I think we're actually specifying this within the modal itself. We actually refactored that, we actually changed that, so that whoever uses this modal component actually has full control over what width to use. I feel like that is kind of useful, because depending on the content of the modal, if we have like very little content, like this delete task modal, we don't want it to like be full width. That wouldn't look good. So we're just giving the user of this modal the opportunity here to select custom classes, and in this fact we're actually using w_half. But when we are on a phone, I think we actually want to use the full width. So like here, you see, yeah, that looks really bad. So that is actually something we need to look at. I guess we can just try those responsive modifiers that we used in the last episode. So we do something like MD. This will be we currently have written everything here like a desktop application. So we can simply add a breakpoint prefix to all of these dimension classes like width, since they are currently the desktop classes. But Tailwind CSS is actually mobile first. So we want that to specify the mobile first classes without any prefix. And in that case, we want it to be full width. So full width on the mobile, and then for the desktop, we want to have it half width. And it actually kind of worked. But we still have the same issue here with this text. We actually want that to wrap down here. So I guess we can have a look at that. And I guess we can just use the same thing we did in the previous episode, break all, since that seemed to work so fine. Yeah, it actually worked, you know. So I guess this is just word break. If we check that class, I think it uses word break. Word break, break all. I think there's break word as well, which we break. Yeah, we break the word based on, you know, white space and such. But we want to use break all here. I feel like I think that looks the best. I guess we want to have some super small padding here. So I'm not really sure if we can implement this on the modal itself, since that would probably be done with padding on the body itself. This gets pretty complicated now, since we kind of want to use the full width, or maybe we just don't want to use the full width. Maybe we want to use something like 95%, since it is centered. We could just, if I just have like a normal vanilla CSS, we can do something like width 95%, and that should work. So all of the modals on the phone should actually be like 95%. Let's see, yeah, that looks much better in my opinion. So Okay, so there we actually have that behavior break all or break words. So here maybe it's actually better to just use break words since we've got that nasty side effect there. You can clearly see that we need to break on words here, otherwise we get this effect where it starts with a word and then breaks it and we're breaking everything. But we want to break word here, so break words and we get that nice effect there. So that looks much better, so that we can actually read it properly. But how are we going to implement this? So if we want to do this, we probably want to do this on the modal itself. So why not just use some vanilla CSS? So if we think that every single modal will have width 95% when we are on the mobile, then we can just add like a rule for that. So I don't think that's a problem. Media screen and min width 768 pixels. We can just search the docs otherwise. So breakpoint using custom breakpoints. Let's see here. So we can actually see that MD here is 768 pixels, so that's correct. I want it to be with 95%. Let's see if I can remove this here. And of course we want it to be applied on the modal. That got a weird syntax there. So modal with 95%, and that actually didn't seem to work. Oh yeah, now I'm actually thinking reversed way. We wanted to apply this on the mobile now. So we actually want it to be desktop first. So then it needs to be max width because we only want it to be applied until we reach 768. So max width, there we go. And that actually seems to work. If I now try to do the same thing here for this modal here, yes, it actually works. So that was a nice trick. We can actually just apply 95%. If we need to have some extremely custom CSS for a modal or extremely custom width in the future, then we can apply that then. Yeah, so that actually seems to work. Let's just try doing some different user actions to see if anything completely breaks on the phone. Would be really unfortunate if that's the case. So if I just do like a super long tag, will that break anything? No, it doesn't seem to break anything. Isn't that amazing? We built some really bulletproof software over here. Isn't that great? Let's see if there's any problem with that. If I move this over, I guess something we can look a bit at is this weird border that we have from Svelte D&D action. I think there's just some default styles for these different zones here. So we actually want to remove that style, I believe. So we don't want to have any borders at all, I think. Or maybe we do, I'm not sure. So let's search down the docs here. I think there's actually an option for this. So we have drop target style. Yeah, you can see we have some outline here, which we don't want to use. We actually want to use no style at all. So let's see if I can do something like that. So that is in the to-do column, I believe, or to-do board. Yeah, we actually didn't use to-do column, so I'm not sure if we're gonna remove that or not. Perhaps we will though, since we have a lot of things going on here. So maybe that's a wise choice. But for this, we want to have use a D&D zone. We have items here, and then we want to have options, I believe, as well. So items, and then we want to have drop target style. If I just make that an empty string, what will happen? Okay, so it wants to have like, if I just make an empty object, then will that work? Yes, it seems to work. Isn't that amazing? So we actually just cleared that style. We are no longer applying any style at all now, and that's kind of good, since I think it looks better than that weird yellow border that we had there. So that's kind of cool. Great. So why not just take a moment here to actually use that to do column. I actually think we have a bit too much code here for this purpose. We can just put it in its own little component, and you should always think about creating as small components as possible. You don't have to go into oblivion here with these components, but if they have a very clear-cut responsibility and styling or something like that, then it's always good to create components so that we can isolate them from each other. But this could actually be quite difficult. Let's see now. So what we want to have for each column is simply this, I believe. So each column, then we want to have a to-do column for that. So let's see now, we have statuses. If I just create a script tag here so that we can see everything. I think the biggest problem here will probably be these handle, D&D, consider, and finalize, but I guess we want to pass in the column here. So column should be task column, let's see there. And then we want to use statuses as well. Are we using this somewhere else in here? No, we aren't. So let's copy that there. There we got that. Let's import that. And then we have this handle DD consider as well. And Svelte in the zone, we can import that one. Handle DD consider. Let's see how we can use these over here. So if I just copy them over, let's see. So I have columns, yeah, so this is kind of the problem that I was anticipating, that I think this is something we actually want to do in todoboard.svelte and not actually in the column. I don't think the responsibility of this column is to kind of set items, unless we pass in the column itself or something. Maybe we can do that. So maybe we can actually use that column somehow and set the items on that object. That would be kind of cool. If I'm just using column.items, maybe that will actually just work. So status here, I'm not using that or this one, in fact. So for consider, we don't want to pass in those. That was just an oversight. So if I just remove them, then we have I here, and this we are not using currently, so let's just remove that. And column.status, so we can just access, since we have access to that column prop. So perhaps we can just do that. So task.status is task column status here. So we just pass in that event. Maybe that will be fine. Let's see. So on task completed change, we have all of these things that we perhaps want to use. So yeah, here we actually get into a big problem. But I feel like this we could actually just pass on to the parent component and try to. So let's see if we can do that. On edit, we can just simply forward these ones over, I feel like. So we just do something like to do column, and then we pass in that column here. So that should actually be bind column, since we're actually going to be mutating it. Two-way data binding there. And then let's see if I just put these event on dispatch. So this item will actually come from here. So we want to pass in an event as well. So event here. And then we want to use e.detail, I believe. So we can just pass in the task here as the event detail. But of course, then we want to be able to handle that. So we need to copy these here as well. Since we use this item here from the loop, we need to be able to pass that in. So let's dispatch edit. Then I want to dispatch item here. So I want to dispatch the current item, and on delete we want to dispatch the item as well. So, and then of course we want to have an event dispatcher for that. So const dispatch, let's create event dispatcher. And then on task completed change, if I look over here, yeah, so this one we actually want to be running inside of to-do board, I feel like. So this we can just pass on as well. So item e.detail. So I guess we're gonna do something like dispatch, and then the event name here was completed change. This e.detail, I'm pretty sure is just the completed status, you know, the boolean here. So let's see, yeah, it's actually a boolean. So we probably want to send in an object here instead. So we can't really pass in multiple details, I believe, but of course we can just wrap it in an object. So this is something like task will be item, and then we want to have completed, which should be e.detail here, since we get that from this event over here. So then I can remove these events since we're not really using them. Let's see, there's no real errors here, so that's a good sign, of course. Then of course on task completed change we want to handle as well. So E here will contain that detail. So on task completed change, and then we want to have e.task, e.detail.task, and then e.detail.completed, since these are our properties of that object that we are passing in. We also have on title change, so we want to of course forward that. Let's see, is there anything else? We have on edit, on delete, on title change. But we also have something called on update. I'm not really sure what that is. Oh yeah, of course it's this update, so that we can reorder them and stuff like that. And when we also change the status, so we want to just pass that on, I'm pretty sure. So we just use event forwarding here. So since we're not using an event handler here, we're just passing it further on to the parent component. So let's see here, is there anything else we need to change? I don't think so, actually. So if I now try this out, we have this task here. If I move this over here and I reload, will that persist? Yeah, it seems to be working, actually. Let's see now here. I'm not really sure if the task status actually works, so we can just try logging. We can just try printing that here on this task card. So data.status, and that is now completed. I can move it in progress. You know, all of this seems to be working like before. If I have this content editable, if I change that and I reload, yeah, it's still persisting. So it seems to be a good indicator that our refactoring here worked. I also feel like we made the code much cleaner now, since we don't have that much nesting here in to-do board. We're just looping over each column and then we're rendering a to-do column. And I feel like that is kind of a good principle to follow, that when you're looping over stuff, then if there's not like only one line here, then you probably want to put it in a component, most likely. So I feel like this was a really good refactoring to do. I feel like we should continue on now with some more functionality. And one of the features that I've been thinking about adding for some time now is like a list, so that you can have different lists based on, you know, what you're doing. You know, if you can have one, you can have like one list for your personal stuff, like clean the house or something. Then you have one list for your job. So maybe you could have like a list for this project, this to-do application. You have a to-do application project inside of your to-do application project, where you just manage what you're doing and your tasks. So that is something that I feel like would be nice to implement, so that you can separate things and not have everything in one board. And this should also be pretty simple to implement. We just want to have different to-do boards. We just have this to-do board with task columns. We want to have different columns based on a status. So I'm thinking we can have like an array of objects where we have like a name, we give them a name like work, personal, to-do app or something, and then we have that actual task column, and then we just render that to-do board. I feel like that shouldn't be overly complicated actually. So if I just go to the model now and think about how to structure this, I guess we can do something like task list perhaps, or yeah, I guess we can have something like a task list. I think this is a pretty bad name to choose actually, since this just kind of indicates that we have multiple tasks. So it's more like a task board list or something. So task board list is a list of task boards. That's a bit better. So then we want to give it a name. So we want to have a name string, and then we want to have the actual board. So this will be a to-do board. Well, we don't actually have like a to-do board model, or maybe we do. We just have task column array. So I guess we could like create a custom type. So we could do something like this. Just like we have this type alias over here, we could do something like type to do board, and that will be a task column array. Why not? You know, it doesn't hurt. So a to do board. Then of course we want to make sure this can actually be a problem though, since we have the same name for that. So why not just do task column array for now, since we don't want to get any conflicts. So we have this task board list to give it a name, and we give it a board. This should be pretty simple to implement. So if I just go to app.svelte, we just have these main columns here. Oh yeah, so this is actually a bit more complicated than I thought, since we have actual columns here, but this is just the default board. So it should just be something like lists, and there will be an array of task board lists. So we're making list inception here, so lists, and then we want to have an array here, and then we just put an object here, which we have name should be default board, and then we have items or board. Yeah, so the board will be that, and then we have an array here of task columns. So that is what I'm thinking. We have a list of task boards, so we just give it a name, and then we put the actual board, which is an array of task column, and then inside of that column we have an array of items, which is an array of just normal tasks. So that should be pretty simple to implement. If I just comment out that column, so we can just see wherever we have these problems. But then we also need to keep track of the current list. So we need to have like some way to do that. We can just give this a ID, so UUID v4. Can copy from somewhere, since we're doing this thing here. So that we want to copy over here and import. There we go. So now we also want to handle this loading stuff, and then we just want to put that in lists instead, so data here, that should be fine. Then on task delete, we need to get the current active board. We should create something for that. So I guess we can just do something like an ID, I guess. So current board, which will be an ID, and then we can just get the current board and then iterate over that, I believe. If we're doing this a default way, I guess we want to use the same ID. So this will be something like that, and then we can put current board there. So on task delete, we have columns, and that columns is part of the list now. So we want to get the list. So list.find list and list.id equals current board. So we should actually call this boards instead. We're not actually having a list of lists, we have a list of boards. So this will be boards instead. Boards find, and then we can use that here. So if I just do columns here, that should be boards. Oh, we call that board. So it's a task board list. I'm getting really confused by this model now. So we have a task board list. So it's more like this is actually the task board. So the task board will contain the columns. So this should be task board, not task board list. Yeah. So columns, task columns. Then we have the columns, which is an array of the columns of the board. So board.columns, and then we have the same thing here, so board.columns. So this should be task board now. So task board, change that here as well, so columns, there we go. Then of course we need to change all of this down there. Let's take it one step at a time though. So we're gonna move this statuses up here. We don't want to put that there, so let's just clean that up a bit. Statuses, and then the same thing here. So we want to get the current board. So that should be something like that, and we do board.columns instead to get that access. And when we save to local storage, we don't want to save the columns of one board, we want to save the array of all of the possible boards. So now let's tackle that. So we have to-do board, and this to-do board will be the current board that we are dealing with. So I guess we can just rename this to current board ID and actually have like an object for that. So if I do something like current board, then I guess we can use like a reactive syntax for this. So current board will be boards find board, and board.id will be current board ID. And this will of course be board. And this will of course be task board or null, since it could actually be null, since this could actually return null. So I guess we can do something like this now. So we want to check if it exists. So if current board, and then we can use that here. So bind columns should just be current board.column. Everywhere where we use columns, we just use current board.columns instead. So bind columns will be something like this. Let's see if that works. Everything broke. Fantastic. So we have some problem here. Let's see where that is from. So to do item create change at columns is current border columns, of course. So we only want to render this if it's not null. So we can wrap everything that uses that in one if statement here. It broke even further now. Okay, maybe not. What is happening now? Yeah, of course, it is null, so it's not showing them. Current board is boards.find current board ID. Let's just try out a function for this. So get current board, and then we want to have current board ID. So let's return boards find here. Let's see if that works. Current board will get current board, and there should be current board ID. Okay, so now it actually worked. I'm not really sure. I'm not that big of an expert of these reactive syntaxes, but something that I thought about is if this boards array changes. I'm not really sure if this reactive syntax will react to that, since it could actually change just since we're adding to an item here, and then perhaps we change this boards array. And then we don't want to find, we only want to run this, we only want to filter these when we change the current board ID. So like when we select another board, not when we add an item inside of the board. We don't want to check that again. So we want to think a bit about performance. Since Svelte is so amazingly dynamic, it can be quite easy to write something that could be inefficient. And it will only really show itself if you're dealing with loads of data. But of course, it's always good to keep in the back of your mind to not write something, stupid. So it's always good to keep in the back of your mind to not do something completely stupid. But for some reason that worked, but not the other syntax. So I'm not really sure what that is about. Maybe it's just because boards is null or not defined previously. I guess we can experiment and see a bit why that is. So I just did something like, if I just put the same expression here, we're only putting it in a function currently. So we can see now it's no longer working, and I'm not really sure why that is. The boards shouldn't be null. If I just do something like boards at 0, let's see if that works. So So that kind of works. I guess it probably has something to do with how Svelte initializes things. So feel free to comment if you know what the reason is for that. But I wanted to put it in the function anyway, since I feel like that is the most easy to manage way and also easier to write performant code in. So we want to get current board, and we're only passing in current board ID. So in theory, this should only be reactive whenever current board ID changes, if I understand this reactivity correctly. So now if I add some stuff to that, let's see if we can actually persist this, if that works well enough. Nope, it did not. So I guess maybe we're just not binding properly or something like that. So if we just try writing out JSON stringify boards here and see what we get. Okay, we have something saved in there, which we probably don't want to use. So let's try clearing the local storage if there's any problem there. So now if I add some stuff here, we want that to be reactive. You know, that should appear there now, but it doesn't. So there's definitely something wrong there. I think it has to do probably with current board. I don't think we can actually use that here. So if I just log that current board ID, I get there. So I just get a random UID. And if I just log boards as well, then we want that to match up as well, of course. So let's see here. Boards is an array where we have that ID here. So where we have that ID 660 and we have ID here. So that seems to be correct. And then we have the columns of that board. What I believe here is that we just get another copy of that board. So if I just print out current board as well, let's see what goes on then. So if I just do like BR just to see some difference there. So if I reload now, okay, so there's definitely something saved to local storage, but it's not working. So maybe that's just the case, but it should be reactive anyway. So yeah, so it's adding to current board. I believe it actually adds to board as. If I just reload now, will that persist? You know, it's actually being saved to local storage. This expression is not fully reactive. Oh yeah, but it seems that JSON stringify is not completely reactive here. I'm not really sure. It is clearly reactive when I change to current boards, but it seems that it's not being reactive on boards itself. There's definitely some weird reactivity stuff going on here that I'm not fully grasping, as you can tell, but we can see that it's actually saving it properly. If I just like add another task here, if I just, well, remove 2, if I have like 3 tasks here, okay, it completely broke now. If I reload now, we can see that there is stuff here. It has added my ASD stuff, you know, of my keyboard spamming. So clearly it's saving. The internal data is being changed, but it's definitely not loading it properly either. And that makes total sense, I believe, also, since we have current board ID and we're just assigning boards, but we're never setting the current board ID here. So it actually doesn't know what to use. So if I just do current board ID and then I do something like data at 0, which should be the first board, and then use that ID. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so that actually worked. So now it's just using the first board. Let's see if I remove all of this debug nonsense, if it will actually just behave like we expect it to. So if I just move this over here and reload, yeah, it actually seems to be persisting it properly. So that's cool. If I change this up a bit, that did not work. So it's not fully reactive, but I'm pretty sure this is actually changing in the behind the scenes here. So if I reload, okay, so yeah, it's actually changing here. If I save that, yeah, so it does change. It's just not reactive anymore. If I try removing something now, what will happen? Nothing happens, but if I actually reload, we can see that it has been removed since the internal data changes. So let's bring back that logging. It's always good to have something to rely on here. So if I stringify the boards and the stringify, if I now delete this, what will happen? I delete that, absolutely nothing happens. It doesn't remove anything in the board itself either, not the current board either, which I'm actually binding to. So that's kind of weird. Oh yeah, so I think it's actually something to do with these things here. Clearly it has to be that, because that's the things we changed and it does not seem to be working. So it actually makes sense, since we're using a local variable here, So we're updating the internal data, but Svelte doesn't know about it. So if I just do something like boards equal boards, so this weird syntax once more, but we're just doing this to tell Svelte that, hey, this data has changed and you need to know about it. So if I do that there, and then I do it on task delete as well, then that hopefully should do the trick. So if I now add some items here and I move that over and I delete that, it doesn't work. But perhaps that's because we're binding to current board, and current board is not reactive then. So I guess we want to rerun get current board as well. So this is definitely some complicated reactivity stuff. So we want to have this current board also needs to be changed. So we just have to do something like current board equals get current board and then current board ID. And we could probably rewrite this to just have like, we have access to the current board ID, but we're only passing that in here to make this reactive. Since we need to use it here, and in this reactive syntax, we need to pass in the variable that we want it to listen to. So we need to make sure that we can just do something like this for now. So if I just change this as well, moment of truth now, will it work? 3rd times the charm. If I delete it now, yes, it will. So if I try changing this here and I change this over here and save, yeah, now it actually works like we expected. So that was a nice little venture down the rabbit hole, but we actually managed to come out stronger on the other side. So always fun dealing with some Svelte reactivity here and then, and refresh your knowledge. So now we actually have boards. Let's see if we actually make something work real quick. I feel like this video is becoming quite long now, so I should not drag it out for way too long. Let's just add some simple little select here. So then we just want to have different boards, I believe. So we actually do have access to different boards. So just each over boards as board, and then we just pass in that name here. So if I just do something like board.name, bind the value here to current board ID. And then of course we want to have an ID here as well. So that should be value. And the value here will be board.id. If I move this now down here into the body, we don't want it to be outside of the body. So we have default board. We don't have any other boards than that. But if I can do something like adding another board, if I just, let's see, we have this default board layout. If I just add another board here, then hopefully that should work. So I guess we can do something like generating another board ID real quick here. So then of course we will probably not have access to that since we're loading from local storage. But if I clear my local storage now, and hopefully get some default data here. So you have default board and then another board. Let's see now if I add some stuff in this board and move it over here. We have this here and that works. And if I go to another board, boom, we have no tasks in this board. If I add some stuff in here and I move them around a bit, and there I reload, default board we have this, and another board we have that. Default board, another board, default board, another board, and wow, it actually seems to work. Isn't that cool? And that was super straightforward, at least if you know what you're doing with Svelte reactivity, which you could probably tell I'm not fully 100% on this stuff. So definitely a good learning process as well for me. We can clearly see it kind of works now. So we can actually add some tasks into one board we have in this board, and then I move to default board, we have this stuff, and I go back to another board, we have another layout. We can actually do some stuff like that. So in the next episode, I definitely feel like we should clean this up a little bit and probably refactor the code once more, since it got pretty hectic there. And we should also probably add some nice design for this so that you can actually create boards and give them names and stuff like that. So that's for the next episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We got some nice refactoring done early on, and we looked a bit at some responsive stuff and also added boards now, so we can actually have multiple boards. That is a really nice feature that I'm probably gonna use myself, so that's kind of cool. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, feel free to like it or dislike it depending on what you thought of the video, and also feel free to comment if you caught me doing something stupid. I would love to know if you're like a Svelte expert and you know all about reactivity. Feel free to correct me if I did something stupid here, or just tell me how your project is going. I would love to know. And also feel free to subscribe if you want to be part of this community that I'm trying to build, where we can learn from each other. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.